It may get a little better over time, and you may learn different ways in which to live with it or grow with it. Ignoring situations and pretending your grief doesn't exist will only make it harder and worse. Hello, truth tellers. Welcome back to the ADHD Scapegoat podcast, where we talk about everything ADHD and scapegoating. I'm Angie.
I'm Jeremy.
And today we're going to discuss a heavy topic, and that's grief. So a little disclaimer. We're going to discuss grief, abuse, and familial abandonment. So if there are moments that are triggering to your own healing, please pause and come back when you're ready. So we thought about doing this episode now because holidays can be especially hard when you're still grieving with, memories with broken relationships. They kind of pop up at any time, and you're not necessarily ready for them this time of year. A new year starting without someone in your life that's important to you, it's painful. So while you're supposed to be, quote unquote, celebrating togetherness and holidays. Hi, Ellie. She wants to be in this one. You feel like you have to pretend that the grief doesn't exist and have a good time, or, put on that everything is fine, right? Mm-hmm. So we wanted to discuss a couple different types of grief that I've experienced in my entire life, but really understood over the past couple of years with this huge family break. And there are many different forms of grief, but I'm just going to focus on a few today. So the first type of grief I want to talk about is ambiguous grief. And I didn't really know what this was until my therapist brought it up. And I felt it because ambiguous grief is grieving someone who is still alive. So it's basically the loss of a significant relationship in your life, but obviously the person's still living, and you feel disconnected from yourself, and you're disconnected from others, and you feel kind of stuck, like you can't move forward. The loss is very profound, whether it's a friend that you just stopped talking to, or, someone moves away unexpectedly, gets a new job, and you don't see them as much, or what have you. There's just a break. So I experienced this with the estrangement of my younger sister, which I've talked about. I was completely gutted by her silent treatment and initially kind of ghosting my texts, as well as her accusations in moments where she would speak, not directly to me, but she would speak as to me and my older sister, group us together with this narrative, or my parents would be speaking for her, in different situations. And it was something I've never experienced before. I have a very strong intuition, and I usually, you can vouch for this, I read people really well. And I used to hold back because I was called crazy and dramatic about these feelings about people. I don't trust this person, or something's off, something's wrong, or they're not saying no, something's wrong. But I say that to you all the time now, and
you're usually right.
I'm very seldomly wrong about it. And not that I need to be right. I just listen to my intuition, and, I just proceed with caution, right? So obviously, in knowing my younger sister our whole lives and kind of the connection we had, being an older sister and her being the younger one, there's always a little bit of a dynamic, like I would boss her around, and that was probably true at certain points, but it wasn't, again, when you look at intent, it wasn't malicious intent. A lot of times it was more about pushing her to see her value or pushing her to do what I know she's telling me she wants to do, and letting her know she can do it. It might not come easily at first, or it might be like, I understood without understanding that I had ADHD that I was able to embrace change, and I loved new challenges, and that was a strength for me. And I was trying to share that and be like, yeah, that might not come naturally to you like it does for me, but you can still do it, you know? And of course it didn't always come across in the perfect way. But again, I think there was part of our just knowing each other and trusting each other that maybe I was lazy about communicating in the right way at certain points, just like assuming she understood my intentions were always good.
You saw potential and desire from her to
Right.
reach certain goals, and so you were in times coaching her, you were definitely encouraging her, pushing her to reach that potential that you saw. And I think sometimes, I know this happens with my sister and I, it can come when not a criticism, but even if it's constructive criticism, or if it's that, even if it's just encouragement,
Right.
it can feel pointed. It can feel like criticism, because sometimes maybe, and I can't speak for your younger sister, but I feel like sometimes maybe it was just venting, or maybe it was just,
Right.
oh, I can say this to Angie because she's a safe person. And, you know, the side of her that just wanted a little bit of the consolation of, well, yeah, I know it's tough, versus your motivated spirit saying, okay, well, here's how we're going to get
Right.
it, and laying out that plan. Sometimes you just want the comfort of someone being on your side and just saying, you know, yep, you're stuck. We've all been there, which you did your fair share of. But
yeah, there
she would come to
definitely.
you in a way that she was definitely wanted help
Right.
or encouragement, you would always provide that.
Well, and I also think, you know, since starting coaching and understanding, you know, a little bit deeper about some of my own habits from being in our dysfunctional family, that there were times I definitely didn't pause and say, what does support look like for you right now? Because there probably were times where she's like, I want advice, tell me what to do. Or there are times where she's like, can I just talk to you and you just like sit with me and do that? Like, neither of us communicated that properly, but I definitely have learned, and me and my older sister have even talked about that between us, because her being the older sister, sometimes I would get that impression from her, like she was bossing me around. But I mean, she was completely parentified and had all the responsibilities. And so she had that, and she also had I have to protect my siblings because my parents aren't, right? So I totally understand that. And we've talked about it now, sometimes the messaging, like maybe just ask each other, what does support look like for you right now? Or what do you need right now? Like, how can I help? And actually listening to what the other says. Like, sometimes it's just the fact that she asks or I ask, what do you need right now, is all we needed, right? But that is definitely something that I wasn't able to do and have learned and would do differently, right? And I also, it's still hard to understand when I spend like countless hours reading and journaling and talking to my therapist and researching and trying to understand like what I was going through and what I could have done differently, I still have a hard time understanding how she could believe that I don't want her to be happy, or that I'm out to control her life, or I just meddle in her business because I want to. It doesn't, none of it adds up as to any way I've ever actually treated her.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to do self-reflection, but I don't think that you were necessarily doing anything wrong. I think when you have low self-esteem or some form of depression, those acts of you encouraging her can feel like criticism and make her feel
Absolutely.
like I'm not at the place where I should or want to be. And you pointing out ways that she can get there serve as reminders
of what
that she's not there yet.
Right. And of course that wasn't the intention. And I think that if it would have been communicated, if there would have been more back and forth, I think it's just harder for her. It's always been harder for her to talk about the hard stuff, which is another way why she kind of resembles my mom's behavior around that. Is my mom will talk about the happy stuff, but never the hard stuff. And I'm like, well, the hard stuff is what makes those happy things happen. Is if we resolve those hard things, then we can be happy. But if we continue to ignore the hard things, then we keep running into the hard things. So I don't know. That's just the way I see it. But as I'm going through healing and everything, every little piece of this puzzle that I was trying to put together, I felt like I kept getting like re-traumatized over this grief that I had no answer to. I didn't have a conversation. She wouldn't hear my side of the story. And at one point she even said in like a family group text, you tell everybody about this behind my back, but you don't tell me. And you don't answer my texts or my calls. You won't talk to me. How am I supposed to tell you anything? So it's like, you don't want to hear it. That's why you're avoiding me. That's why none of them will talk to me, because they don't want to hear the truth and they don't want to know my side. They would rather choose this. And for my relationship with her, I mean, that's completely devastating. So seeing clearly how my father and my older brother's scapegoating abuse towards me fueled my sister to believe these lies, which we talked about in the last episode, believe the lies that her partner is telling her about my character, was a re-traumatizing part of putting the puzzle piece together, to really understand that not only did they not love and care about me, but they were using me to harm her and to not keep, and putting, but also presenting it to her as if they're supporting her. And it's just next level deception. And knowing, I kind of talked about this last time, like knowing that her partner needed to isolate her in order to control her and do the things that he needed to do, our family dysfunction played right into his hand, I mean, it was so easy. He used it to his advantage. She started treating me in ways that she never would before this person came into her life, even with living in the same house with my father and my older brother. But she wasn't there for my kids like she was before, which was really, really hard to swallow. And she was doing things she never did, saying things she would never say that don't align with the person that I believed she was, and you too, but she just didn't seem to care that she cut me out of her life. Like, it didn't faze her to remove me, to remove our boys, to remove you. And you guys were really close too. So, I mean, she lived with us for a while. And how close she was with our boys, it was as a protective parent, it was harmful. So part of the ambiguous grief of why it's so hard is that it's ambiguous because you have no idea if this person will ever come back, if they will be the person that you knew and loved. I mean, obviously people grow and change, but at the core of who they are they that same person? Or if you will just never see them again. And if you did, would you be able to trust that things will be different than when you had the break? Or is there so much broken that it can't be fixed and the relationship will just be over?
Yeah, I mean, the ambiguous grief, it's one thing when you're grieving the loss of someone when they pass away, but you're living on guard with ambiguous grief, right? Because you don't know when that person may pop up randomly in your life. You have to be aware all the time, hypervigilant, any
Right.
place that you go, for all of those reasons that you just said. What's that experience going to be like? They're a changed person in a negative way. Are they going to ignore me? Are they going to verbally assault me? Are they going to physically assault me?
Right.
That is a tough situation, where you're always kind of looking over your shoulder, no matter where you are, even though you know you're probably not going to see that person there.
Right. And it's just like an extra level of preparedness and like things that we've talked about before, where we, if we're about to go into a situation where we just want to run some scenarios to make sure we have our boundaries in place. It's very similar. But I remember our oldest son saying to me one night when we were doing bedtime, and I'm going to pause. I practiced this and I could say it just fine. But he said, I'm not ever going to see again, am I? And I was taken aback when he said it. It wasn't something like we weren't talking about her, or he was just thinking about her. And I remember feeling so much pain for him and for me in that moment, knowing that I've asked myself that same question. And as we do with our kids, we don't lie to them. We speak to them in a way that they can understand, that's age appropriate. And I let him know I didn't lie to him and say, oh, no, don't think that or anything, because I didn't want to push down his feelings. They're real. And I just said, I hope not, buddy. But I feel that way too sometimes, and I understand how you're feeling. And it's something I think about. I said, I know it's hard, but I'm here whenever you want to talk about it, even if it's hard, even if you're mad or you're upset or you're just really sad and you just want to talk about nice memories. But it's hard and it's sad and it's not fair. But I will be here with you. We'll get through it together. Basically just opening it up to, if he has those feelings, that he can talk to me about it. And I understand. And even if I don't necessarily understand exactly what he's feeling, I want to hear it and I want to be there for him.
Right. So you're going through this grief, navigating this, but now you're also having to talk your kids through it.
Right.
Which I don't know that I guess we have talked about it, about just the weight of
right.
having to handle it yourself, but then also try to explain it to an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old is really heavy.
Right.
Because then you're grappling with at least that's what I do, then you walk away from that conversation. Did I say the right thing? Did they fully understand? Did it make them feel worse? Did it actually make them feel better? It's a lot.
Yeah, I feel like I think those things a little bit when I leave, but I just always let them know if they have another question that comes up. Do they want to keep talking about it? Do they not want to keep talking about it? Whatever they kind of need, and kind of leaving it open like that was never given to me. Like, not only were my emotions wrong, but they weren't supported. There wasn't open conversation. I either stuffed it down or figured out how to get through it myself. And that's too much for a child to carry. And I know that. And so even though this is so hard for me, my job as their parent is to protect them from harm, but allow them to experience their real emotions and just be there. Like, let them know, like, bad things happen, but it doesn't mean everything is bad, and it also doesn't mean everything is good and everything will be fine. Like, it's letting them know that yes, there will be hard times, and you have a support system that will always have your back.
Yeah, that's the right message.
And we won't get into the 5 stages of grief, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I don't necessarily feel like I had denial around it. It was just more confusion. It wasn't like I was denying that it was happening. I was trying to get her to tell me why she didn't want to talk to me or why she was avoiding talking to me. And so it was more confusion around that, and then definite anger, because I knew that the with no explanation or no asking, hey, did you do this? Hey, did you say this? Hey, what is your intention here? And actually listening to me, of course it would make you angry. There are things being said that aren't true. There are lies that are being manipulated to make her have this distance from me. It's not fair. It's not right. Yeah, of course, anger is telling you something's wrong. You need to listen to your anger. Anger doesn't always mean rage, yelling, belittling, which is a lot of the reason why I believe my mom and my younger sister try to pretend like everything's fine and nothing bad will ever happen is because they've only seen anger coming from my father, which is rage and belittlement and the silent treatment, and it's awful. But that's not what healthy anger is. It's unhealthy. And your healthy anger is a sign for you to look at it deeper. But so it's hard, I'm angry, but it's hard for me to be angry with her because I see how she's being abused. I'm angry with my father and my brother and my mother and her partner because they're either directly abusing her or allowing her to be abused or feeding a narrative to put blame on me to look away from the things that they're doing. So I hold a deep belief that if she were to get some distance from this relationship and breathe air that wasn't filled with hate, that she wouldn't be angry with me. I've had dreams about it. And I think understanding that on one side, there's the idea that she is an adult and she makes her own decisions. But when you're being lied to and manipulated to believe one thing, you're not really making a decision. You're not getting both sides of the story. You're making a decision based on a lie. So if she's making her own decisions, which I don't think in some of these situations she is, if not all of them, are based on lies and coercion and control. But if she is, they're based on those things. And so it's really hard for me to be angry with her. And at the same time, I also hold the thought of, if she's so quick to believe this bullshit that they're spitting, then maybe she wasn't the person I believed she was. Maybe she isn't kind and patient and understanding. Maybe she doesn't care about my kids. Maybe she never did. Maybe she always hated me. Maybe my connection with her was a lie, and to me, we weren't just sisters, we were like closer to best friends, but maybe that was all wrong. And that's another part of the grief.
That's what all of her actions now are showing you.
Right.
That's what they've shown me. I think that's the hardest part, or that's been the hardest part for me to grapple with in having a close relationship with your younger sister. You mentioned she lived with us for over a year. I would help her with her resume. We helped her move a couple of times. I mean, she was a staple in our older son's life from the moment he came home from the hospital to when she moved out of state. Excuse me. They were buddies, and that was really the hardest part for me in what you just said. Maybe she never really cared. Maybe it was just a means to an end, right? Like, she put up with us so that she had a place to live, or so that she had someone to talk to when she lived near us and wasn't just by herself all of the time. Her actions now, her behavior now, her words now, in the few interactions that we've had with her in the last couple of years, that's what all of that points to.
Right.
And that's you and I have talked about, that's sort of the grieving process for us, is grieving the loss of who we thought she was.
Right. Which is part of, if you understand narcissistic abuse, that's part of the reason why people don't leave narcissistic relationships, is they believe that this person loves them and cares about them. And then to find out that it was all a lie and they were manipulating and lying to you and financially abusing you, sexually abusing you, isolating, all the things that narcissists do, you fell in love with a lie. And I think that's part of, we're seeing almost like a ripple effect of the abuse that I went through in my family, as well as the abuse that she's enduring with this partner, that it feels like these things are a lie because it's such a complete diversion from who I always knew her to be. And when I talk about in other episodes how we grow and change and when you know better, do better, all of that, this is not a positive change. This is very negative. It's very harmful. It's very destructive, and a lot of it very unforgivable. So a second type of grief, to kind of stay on task here. I know we could talk for a long time, but is the anticipatory grief. So again, I talked to my therapist about this. I first started going to the therapist that I go to when our dog Callie passed away, and for the grief, the loss of that dog, who, like, she was my person. So initially I knew she understood trauma and grief and all of that. And so as I'm going through these different stages of grief, she was reminding me of listening to my triggers and listening to my intuition and writing down things that come up, like, little details around, which I also do in my coaching now, but it was way back then in 2018 when she was walking me through just initially writing down all your triggers, because then it'll just become, oh, you don't have to write them down anymore. You just become aware of them and they pop up. But understanding as my grief starts evolving, or different feelings that I'm having, and I go through the different stages, like ask her whatever about that space that I'm in at that point. So I remember coming to her and I was like, part of me feels like I can't say this out loud because anticipatory grief is grief that comes when, usually it's like when we anticipate someone dying because they have a terminal illness, like they got a diagnosis with a terminal illness, or someone is really old and going through health complications, and you're just like, you just kind of have that where you want to, to prepare, I guess, is more quickly what I mean. And so as soon as you accept and understand that they're going to die, you can start grieving, right? And so it's confusing because I felt conflicted. I almost felt like I couldn't say it out loud because I felt so helpless. I didn't want it to be true, but I came to her and, like, I believe that she could very well be killed by this partner, with the escalation of his abusive behavior, the lack of accountability that he's had, and statistically, in these situations, with lack of accountability, they feel more empowered to increase their abuse. And so the anticipatory grief is fearing that, not wanting to think it, not wanting it to happen at all. But you're also grieving these experiences that you wish you could have had with them, that you no longer can fulfill. Or, I mean, prior to her meeting this person and having her be my maid of honor and us being bridesmaids in our older sister's wedding and all of that, it was, wanting to be a part of that with her. And that was taken from us. And that was something we will never experience with her, that we kind of assumed. But part of anticipating is hoping to have a little more peace and a little more closure, able to spend more time with that person, let them know that you love them. So it's not just like a car accident or, a tragic thing that happens and they're just gone and you didn't get to do those things. That's part of this. Is not only is the ambiguous grief of, I don't even know if I'll ever see her again, but will I even know if she dies? How will I find out? It's a lot. And after everything that I've learned and, speaking with my therapist about this and discussing with my therapist his behavior and the evidence of his violent past and sharing that with my family, but because they were so conditioned to scapegoat me, they aren't listening to that from me. And my younger brother even, he said it so many times, I wish I would have just done the background check, or at least we just could have said that I did it, so it wouldn't be this like, oh, Angie did this thing, because it's ridiculous. And instead of being that unit of support that I talked about before, was like, we're separated, we're split, we don't know, and we don't know if we'll know. It's just this helpless feeling. And it's really confusing, but I think if you've experienced any level of these things, you will relate and you'll get it, but I hope I'm explaining it clearly. Okay, and the last grief, it's called secondary loss, but it's the last one I want to go through today, and it's basically that this main loss of my younger sister impacts many areas of my life. So having this disconnect from her and going through reaching out to family, looking for support, trying to understand, it shined a major light on all of our family dysfunction that I kind of knew it was there, but I also had this, I kind of lived in a false hope of like, they'll understand, they'll get it, I'm an adult, they know that I'm a good person, they love me, they care about me mindset still, even though I knew that all these bad things were happening or I mean, I could see the gossip and all that, right? But losing my sister and what I believed prior to the break really shined a light on just how bad all of this was. I realized that they used her to harm me because they know that I truly care about her. They knew it would break my heart if I didn't have her in my life. And I'm sure she was heartbroken too, especially if she believed everything that was being said. If she really thinks that those were the things I was doing and that's not the person that she knows, I'm sure it's heartbreaking for her too. And I get that. but they did that maliciously and on purpose, or even maybe subconsciously, just as like because they're so indoctrinated into this family dysfunction that, you know what, as long as it's not coming at me, I have to protect me. Screw Angie. Like, whatever, she's the problem, she's a scapegoat, she can handle it, just pile it on to her. And I've tried to have conversations to understand why we weren't talking, like asking if I had done something to make her mad at me, asking for a conversation. She kept telling me I did nothing wrong. She kept telling me that she was just flaky, she would forget to call, or she was on her way out the door, or whatever, or she was sleeping, or whatever. But then I would hear from family members that she was mad at me. And so nothing made sense. And I realized that this was created conflict. This was information. My father never came to me to ask my side of the story. The only time I spoke to my older brother was to call initially to ask him to reach out to her for support. And then I didn't after that. I tried having a conversation with my mother as well, but I'll get into that. But knowing that my father and older brother have always been horrible to me, it was, I said before, I was done. They were putting her in a dangerous situation for no reason other than to protect their own false image and pretend they did nothing wrong. It sickens me, and it does make me angry because they're using us to harm each other, and watching us both struggle and be upset, and we're both grieving this relationship while they're doing nothing to try to support or bring us back together or even have a conversation. So I don't really consider them to be a loss, a secondary loss. I consider that a healthy removal of harm in my life. Again, I gave them many opportunities. We've talked about that a little, how many conversations I've had with my father about how his behavior is impacting others, and still harm was done to me. Like, I was done with them. But I also have secondary losses of my older brother's kids, my niece and my nephew, who I hope will be able to see through my brother's smear campaign and all of his lies and know that I show up and I love them unconditionally. And, but I can't be sure that they will. I don't. And, you know, I only hope that, me being authentic and sharing and, you know, I want to have a supportive relationship, especially if he's treating them the way he treated me. You know, I want them to know that they can always come to me. And I mean, even his wife, who I believed liked me and I know has defended me to him at certain points. I don't have her in my life anymore. But the biggest secondary loss was my mom. I think me, my older sister, and my younger brother, we've each discussed how one of these breaks has been more impactful or more hurtful to us. And mine was my mom. And I used to think she was my safe parent, and I knew she was abused by my dad. And I knew how mean he was to her, how he belittled her, made her feel like she was worthless. And I saw it so many times. I stuck up for her. I told her on multiple occasions that she needed to leave him and she didn't deserve to be treated like that. I supported her when he inevitably left her after 33 years of marriage with him for another woman whom he was seeing behind her back. I talked her through her pain, gave her music to bring out her anger around the situation, and empower her to know that she never deserves to be treated like that again. And even after having a conversation with her, a really hard conversation that I really worked through with my therapist and also discussed with my older sister to make sure I handle it in a very delicate way, wanting to understand what she went through, because nothing was ever discussed. We had no insight into anything, no discussions. It's just insane to think about now. But I want to understand what she went through. And I embraced her in a huge hug when she cried, confirming what I already assumed. Not that he was not just mentally and emotionally abusive to her, but he had been physically abusive to her. And she didn't answer with a yes or gave me an explanation. Just the second I asked her, she turned her head and began to sob. And was kind of like trying to hold back her tears. And I just embraced her. And I told her she didn't deserve it. Just like I told my dad when he said, I was told every day I was a piece of shit. And I said, yeah, you didn't deserve that. And I held her, and just like any hard, difficult, not happy situation, she tried to stuff it down and no, she's okay. And I was like, I checked in on her afterwards and wanted to make sure she was okay, because I knew it was hard. I knew it was heavy, but like, I knew she was carrying that silently, and she didn't have support. And she constantly had to fight my dad smearing her to us. He told us kids how incompetent she was, how terrible she was, how she didn't know how to manage any money, and she doesn't do anything right. Even though she did everything, he did nothing. Like, it was just, how on earth? And you have to hold this inside to protect his reputation? I understand. She did what she thought she needed to do to protect herself. And part of her not calling that out was to not have the abuse get worse, right? And I think part of her not leaving him was to protect us, because I think there's also that scary, oh my God, if I'm not with them and they're alone with him, what's going to happen, right? I get that completely. I guess she doesn't feel like she's safe to tell anyone, not even herself, what happened to her and things she experienced, so that she can heal from them. So it just ends up coming out onto us. So I always saw similarities between my younger sister and my mom struggling with their worth. I've talked about that before too. Like, believing in themselves. Like, I don't know. It wasn't like I was a cheerleader, and I wasn't like girl power, but it was more like, what? Why would you put up with that? That's not okay. Like, I would just call it out. And I remember my younger sister saying to me at one point, like, Angie, I'm not like you. I'm not going to be like high maintenance about it. I was like, it's not high maintenance to say, hey, you said you were supposed to you said the date was at 7 and you showed up at 11:30. Not cool. That's not high maintenance. It's not high maintenance to say, no, I don't deserve to be treated like that. I won't put up with that. That's not high maintenance. It's the people who, what's the Chandler line? What does Chandler say to Monica? It's not that you're high maintenance. Or maybe you're a little high maintenance, but I like maintaining you. Isn't that what Chandler says?
I think so.
It's a line from Friends, but it's really, it opens you up to the people who will connect with you, who will honor you, who will allow you to be yourself, who will support you and be there for you. It's not like, oh, I need to be someone's trophy wife and they just that's never what it is. And that's never what I wanted. But I think knowing that I stuck up for my mom, I embraced her, I had empathy for her, I defended her, and she's now enabling this behavior from my father. She's even like on his team. about it. Like they actually, like, yeah, your father already said it, your mother said it. They're like teaming up against their kids. And so they're not just enabling it, but they're still blaming me, playing the victim that they don't get to see their grandkids and all of that. But for someone who knows I would always be there for them, and I have, like my mom and my younger sister knew, to treat me as if I'm the one seeking to harm anyone and turn on me is a horrific pain. When you know how many times you've stood up for someone and had their back and loved them unconditionally, and they just abandon you. They join in on this narrative that doesn't exist, that was created to harm you. And then they don't even have a conversation with you. They just discard you. Like you never existed and you never mattered. It's a devastating grief. And it's meant, their behavior is meant to do that. They wanted to isolate me. They wanted me to not have any support, to not have any connections, to be alone in my grief so that I didn't have the strength to speak out and hold them accountable. And yes, I took time to myself. I now listen to my body and understand when I need a break, when I need to step back, and when I have the energy to move forward. And I've been continuing growing through my healing in order to do that. And we're doing this now. We're
Right.
doing the podcast.
Well, you've said it before, but, fully understanding that background, the history of abuse, neglect, scapegoating, your ADHD definitely saved you.
Right.
And I've said this before, that, and I don't mean this to sound negative, but it's a miracle that you turned out to be such a caring, kind person when you've endured that. You've been conditioned to treat other people like that or sweep things under the rug. Again, I think your ADHD didn't allow you to
Right.
do those things. It allowed you to be who you knew you should be, and it allowed for that kindness and empathy and intuition and love and caring to actually come out and for you to be your true self. So I'm always amazed by how you can approach situations with care and be so thoughtful in situations where it's easy to just react and, move toward anger or
Right.
resentment. You've always approached those situations with empathy and love, and it's very admirable.
Well, thank you. I'm not good at taking compliments, but yeah, I guess of course there have been moments where I don't feel like I'm strong enough, or I don't feel like like, I feel like everything's piled on, and I definitely get into an overwhelmed state. I mean, even like writing up these episodes and talking about this stuff again, and then actually talking about them for the podcast can be pretty draining emotionally and mentally. And I think knowing, especially with the people who have already reached out to me after the first couple came out with positive messages and understanding and looking forward. I mean, people that I never expected anybody to come. I don't know. I feel like people listen, but they don't ever say anything. But people like actually taking the time to not just listen, but come forward and say, thank you for sharing your story. And, you know, I connect with this, or I connect with that part, or, you know, I'm learning about this, or that makes so much sense to me. That feels exactly like my situation. It's what continues to give me energy in those moments. And just like with our kids, in those moments where I have a flash of like, this is so hard for me, I'm like, I can almost visualize myself as a kid and be like, what did she need? And take that extra step, because it's okay. Like when our older son said that to me about not seeing her again, I wasn't just like bawling uncontrollably or like trying to pretend I wasn't going to cry. I let my tears fall, and I was taking breaths so that I wasn't hysterically bawling. I probably, when I came and told you that it happened, I probably was crying a lot harder. But I think it's good that they see that you have emotions and that you experience hard things, and they understand that that's life, and we're supporting each other. They're not supporting me because I'm collapsing. We both felt that same thing at the same time, and we honored that. And that's something I never received. And it's also a part, like when I sit with some of these things, that we're able to break that cycle. We do different things for our kids. We have those hard conversations, and we do those things. There is a lot of anger. It's usually not right away, but it's really easy for me to see what my parents, the choice they made, and know how easy it is for me to love my child and make sure they know their worth and that they're valued and that they're loved. And to know that I wasn't given that. And I wasn't just not given that. Yes, I was completely abandoned, ignored. Still, this is like 2 years later after a lot of this stuff happened, and no one's spoken to me directly. None of the people I'm no contact with. To ask my side of the story. And when that secondary loss of my mom, when I say that that was the biggest one of them all, it's because she wasn't protecting me then, and she still isn't. And I understand that she was in an abusive relationship with my father. She's been divorced for over a decade. And she's still in this place where he gives her this tiny bit of approval because she's taking his stance on this situation with my sister, that she would rather have that than me or my older sister or my younger brother and all of our kids in her life. She'd rather have his approval. And as an adult, like when I was the kid and I had zero control and I had zero power over living in my house with my father, she was the adult. It's her job to protect us from him, even though she's being abused. And even though I understand the situations that she was thinking in, and just that overwhelm of what if. And I also know that she still needed to protect us. And maybe her being there did do that to a certain extent, right? Absolutely. He couldn't just completely become unhinged. But she's had plenty of opportunities, and my younger brother and my older sister have even, point blank said, these are things that would help. And she won't do them. And she continues to sweep everything under the rug, but then tell everybody how horrible I am and how I'm keeping her grandkids from her, and I'm abusing her. So time passing doesn't heal your grief. It may get a little better over time, and you may learn different ways in which to live with it or grow with it. But ignoring situations and pretending your grief doesn't exist will only make it harder and worse. So our question to end today is, how can you acknowledge and honor grief in a way that contributes to your healing process? And I guess the second question would be, and how do you keep that aligned with your values? Until next time, take care.